Well, hello there, and welcome, or welcome back if you have been with us before. I'm Charlie Bloom.
Linda Bloom here.
And we are here with you doing our weekly Thursday afternoon Bloom Talk on Facebook Live. So it's good to be here, and we have a lot of really neat things that we want to be talking about today. Most of them focused on the subject of today, which is what we refer to, what many people refer to as tough love. And for some people, that's kind of like an oxymoron, because when they think of love, they don't so much think of something that's tough or able to be strong. But love actually is much more than just simply being sweet and nice and having warm, affectionate feelings. It is all of that, but it requires more than that. Actually, to really love somebody in a way that impacts deeply on their life, and when you do love someone, that's what you want to do. You want to be able to have deep, meaningful connections with each other. But to do that, you've got to be willing to do more than simply say things that are easy to hear and be kind and considerate and compassionate. Again, all of which is a part of any loving relationship. But sometimes love requires something other than that. Sometimes it requires the willingness to challenge somebody. Sometimes it requires the willingness to take a stand about something that's really important to you, that matters to them. Sometimes it requires the willingness to be honest when it would be a lot easier to just kind of deny or pretend or ignore something that really is difficult to say. So sometimes it requires courage, because whenever we're doing any of those things, we're always putting ourselves at risk of getting an unwanted response from whoever it is that we're speaking to. Because being honest doesn't always mean that we're going to get appreciation for it. And, you know, like that great line in the movie A Few Good Men. You may have seen that movie with one of my favorite actors, Jack Nicholson, who plays an officer. And he's speaking with, who is he speaking with? Anyway, I'll think of his name. And he said, and the other guy says to Jack Nicholson, I want the truth. And Nicholson, in his inimitable way, says, you can't handle the truth. And sometimes, you know, that's the risk that we have to be willing to take, that if we're going to be honest, we have to be willing to risk that person may not respond the way we would like them to. And, you know, just to quote somebody else who is a writer that many of you may be familiar with, M. Scott Peck, who wrote the book, The Road Less Traveled. And one of the things that he says is that a failure to confront, and by confront he means to really speak the truth, a failure to confront is a failure to love. So tough love is the willingness to risk speaking the truth to somebody, which is not a judgment, it's not advice, it's not an opinion, it's not telling them what they should do at all, but it's really speaking from our concerns for them. When we see or observe something that they're doing or saying that we feel could be harmful to them or other people, there's a willingness to express that concern in a respectful way that is not judgmental. Mm-hmm. And the failure to do that, according to Peck, and we agree, is that it's a failure to adequately love another person. And most importantly, The name of the other guy is Tom Cruise.
So I'm totally with Charlie about this piece that the failure to confront is a failure to love. And it's embarrassing to remember and admit how ignorant I was when we first got together, that what I thought love was this sweet strawberry slush style of love, that you smile and you caress and you love talk, and that was my idea of love. I was very quickly put on notice by Charlie that if I was to put a smile on my face, that to him wasn't honest if I was really unhappy about something, not to just hug and not to just smile and not just to pretend that everything was okay. And he has really helped me from the beginning, the very beginning of our relationship, to have a more honest and authentic relationship. And I'm grateful for that. I don't think we would have come as far as we've come if I had clung to my idea about what love was, because it had very limited definition. To be real, to be honest, and to be authentic. But I must admit that I was afraid. I was afraid that if I was to be honest, that I could alienate him and then I might drive him away. So to come to an understanding about expressing myself, my experience, my feelings, my complaint, my dissatisfaction, my unhappiness, my anger or resentment, my sadness, these were a more responsible way to communicate. I had seen sucking it up, repressing it, denying it, shoving it down, or letting it fly with brutal honesty. We don't believe in brutal honesty. There isn't any reason why people have to be brutally honest with each other. But if you want to have a good relationship, hopefully a great relationship, we need to learn how to be honest and talk about our own experience. And on both sides, we need feedback from each other about what we do and don't say, because we can't mind read. And even the people who are the closest, very tuned in and really empathic, they can't exactly know what the other person's experience is. So if I'm doing anything that's offensive or upsetting to Charlie, I want his feedback. I need his feedback because I want to have the most honest, real, authentic, high-functioning relationship that I possibly can have. And I know that he's going to be careful. After years of experience now, he's going to be careful about how he brings anything to me that I might need to know, that I trust that he's not putting me down, he's not criticizing me, he's not trying to get the upper hand. He's wanting to share power with me, and that by telling me some of the things that are hard perhaps for me to hear, bringing some tough love to me, I feel like it's extremely important to our relationship and a great gift to both of us. Then I don't ever have to worry that he's harboring things, that he's keeping things from me, that he's withholding, that we're both really out with what goes on with us.
Yeah, when you think about it, one of the main attractions to being in relationship with somebody is the idea, and this is pretty much without exception, that in some way my life is going to be better with that person than without them. That my life is going to be enhanced, that they are bringing something and some things to me that are really going to contribute to my own well-being. Mm-hmm. And we may not exactly know on a conscious level what those things are that we're hoping to experience. But at an unconscious level, most of us really don't make a mistake when it comes to attracting the people that we really can benefit from being with, even though we may think afterwards, boy, did I make a mistake? Why didn't I, find somebody who was more like me, or who was rational, or who, wasn't crazy, or who was the way they should be. But generally, there's good reason why the person who's in our life is there. Very often that reason has to do with their ability to see things or to experience certain ways of being that we are not able to access ourselves. So they can bring a different kind of a temperament. They can bring a different attitude. They can bring the ability to have insight into things that maybe we're blind to. Mm-hmm. And the challenge for both people is to be able to recognize what it is that we can offer that may be of value to the other person that they may not be seeing. Not necessarily that they're wrong and we're right, or they're deluded and we see the truth, but just that this is a perspective that I have, and to offer it with the intention of serving and contributing to the benefit and the well-being of the other person. And we call these messages feedback. Mm-hmm. Now, feedback is not what a lot of us think it is. Linda's going to say more about it in a moment, but I want to just say one thing. That generally what feedback is not so much about the other person. It's not my opinion, my ideas, my advice about you or what you should do. But feedback is an expression to you of what I experience in response to you. It's my experience.
So sometimes people think feedback comes from the thinking, the rational, the mind. And what we're talking about is our deeper experience. It comes more from our feelings and our heart. So if you're giving something to the other person that's coming out of your opinions, it's often critical and it can really hurt them. If we're speaking from our own experience, I felt disappointed when you broke that agreement with me. That isn't necessarily going to be well received by the other person. They don't want to let us down. They don't want to feel that they're failing us in some way, but it's a lot better than the opinions that come out of our mind, sometimes disguised as questions, like, what's wrong with you that you break your agreements all the time? Didn't you see what time it was? You told me that you were going to be here, which comes across blamey, it comes across critical, it comes across judgmental, and that's what sometimes people justify is giving feedback. And that's just throwing your opinions around. And we want people to be more responsible. You hear all the time about the key to successful relationships is good communication. And this is one way to refine our communication, to speak from a deeper level of our experience, not just our thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really a matter of, the tough part of tough love isn't so much that it's tough for the other person to receive it. It's tough for us to give it, mm-hmm. because we're always taking a risk whenever we give somebody honest feedback. First of all, if we haven't established an understanding in the relationship in which honest feedback is something that we're open to and that is welcome by each person, then we have to create agreement every time we want to give it. In our relationship, we give each other feedback all the time because for a long time, we've had established an understanding that we value each other's input. And we've also had enough positive experience giving and receiving feedback that we trust the intention of the person, that we don't tend to get defensive when we hear it, because we know that whether we agree with it or not, whether we like it or not, that where they're coming from is a desire to contribute to us. Mm-hmm. And it's also okay with the other person. If they give us feedback, we consider it, and we don't necessarily take steps in the direction that they think would be good.
And we might.
Yeah.
Maybe Charlie will say something about what he's needing, what he's wanting, what he's desiring, what his preference is, and I will take that into consideration, and I might shift. And I'd say, yeah, let's do it differently. But this is in sharp contrast what we enjoy now, to how we started out in the beginning. And people seem to really appreciate our before and after stories. Because there was a time in the early part of our relationship when we had to learn the hard way that this wasn't working, is we had kind of a conspiracy to cover some things up. I came to call that the candy-coated cesspool, about not speaking about things that really needed to be addressed. And, we refer oftentimes to this researcher in our field, John Gottman, and he has hard evidence that the people who withhold, the people who sweep things under the rug, the people who candy coat and who gloss things over, who are avoidant, are the most at risk either to break up or to not have a good relationship. And so if you have a tendency to be conflict avoidant, if you fear feedback because the kind of feedback you've gotten before or maybe given has been embarrassing, humiliating, very painful, you might want to reevaluate that if you could be more honest with each other, but leave out that really threats, ultimatums, criticism, and judgment, but you could speak about your deeper experience, that could be a profound step in the right direction towards more authentic relating, more vulnerable relating, more feeling level relating. And it's been good for us.
Yeah, and that's the main reason why it's so important that we learn to be more skillful in the way in which we express what we're experiencing. Most of the time, what people call feedback is anything but, because feedback is simply feeding back to you what's going on with me. What most people call feedback is telling people what it is that we think is going on with them, what we think they should do, what we are assessing as their problems. It's anything but responsible communication that's expressing, here's what I'm experiencing in response to what you just said. Mm-hmm. Here's what I'm experiencing as I look at some of the things that you're doing. I have concerns. I'm worried. I fear that this could be something that could have a really difficult impact on certain people. And so I'm speaking from what's true for me. What that tends to do is it tends to kind of deactivate people's tendency towards defensiveness. Mm-hmm. It feels much easier, much safer for me to hear Linda say, I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned about this behavior. I'm concerned about what it is that I'm observing here. And I just want you to know that. And my fear is whatever, or my concern is this, or my question is this. And that's much easier for me to hear than, you need to take better care of yourself, or you need to stop doing this, or you need to start doing that. As soon as I hear that, as soon as any of us hear those kinds of statements, it's almost impossible not to feel defensive, not to get reactive, not to try to justify, not to try to defend, not to try to rationalize what I'm doing. And the problem with that is that I'm not hearing the message, because as soon as I feel criticized or judged or attacked, my attention immediately goes to defensiveness. I can't help it. It's just human, to do that. So what we want to do is become more skillful in delivering our messages so that we don't reactivate each other by putting each other on the defense.
Now, I want to tell you that we both appreciate that this is not always so easy to do, particularly if you've had a conspiracy of silence to cover things over and you've been dancing around the edges of the issues. To lean into the challenge of bringing tough love as one of the aspects of your partnership can be really daunting. And one of the things that really is helpful to go up to a higher level of responsibility and a more refined level of communication is to realize the prices that we pay when we don't embrace tough love. And one of the biggest prices that we pay is the issues don't go away. By not confronting them, they tend to fester. They tend to marinate. They tend to get bigger. They tend to, little things tend to accumulate. And the research is very clear about this. Most couples don't break up because of some big dramatic incident. It's little tiny incremental things over months, even years, that add up. So you may overlook, I don't want to say anything about it, it's not a big deal, and you put that aside. And then the next day, I'm going to overlook it, I'm not going to mention it, I don't want to make a big deal out of it. But all of these times that we're rationalizing and justifying, they're accumulating. And they can accumulate into being very divisive between the two of us, where the emotional and the sexual intimacy starts to wane, where the feelings of trust and respect starts to wane, and the price is really high. Hi, Beverly. Very happy to hear from you. Glad you're tuned in with us again. So it's one of these situations where it's pay now or pay later. And sometimes if you don't pay now and you have to pay later, because the issues keep accumulating, sometimes you pay with interest. And so we're from the school of thought of try to handle things, while they're still in the small stage before they've accumulated too much. You're really doing yourself a favor, you're doing your relationship a favor, you're doing your partner a favor. And if you have kids, they're watching, even our adult kids are watching us, and we're modeling good communication with them.
For those of you who maybe are familiar with some of these pitfalls, and you have gotten yourself into a hole that you've dug by avoiding being honest with each other, you may have created a situation or co-created a situation in which things are very much at risk, because your tolerance for the accumulated breakdowns that have not been addressed has really gotten thin. And sometimes what we have to do is we have to take a stand, and we have to clarify that we've reached a point where we can't tolerate a certain condition continuing in a relationship, because it's too painful to observe this person in their destructive or self-destructive behavior, if that's the case. And it's too painful for us to be experiencing the negativity that we experience when we withhold the toxicity that arises from unaddressed concerns and issues. And taking a stand is a form of tough love, in which we say, I'm sorry, but I have to admit, I have been dishonest. I haven't really been truthful to you about how intolerable this has become. And I can't stand living this way anymore. And I just need this to happen for us in order for me to be able to continue. Now, that's not a threat, and it shouldn't be used as a threat. But if we don't attend to things earlier on, we're going to get to a point like that, and it's going to be, it's going to feel like you're telling the other person, my way or the highway. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that as these, quote, small things, and none of them are small, but as they come up and we don't address them, the situation doesn't stay the same. Even if the symptoms go underground, it has destabilized. There's less trust. There's less respect. Mm-hmm. There's less safety in the relationship, and we become much more vulnerable. We become closer to the edge where it's not tolerable for me to live this way anymore.
So what Charlie's talking about here is that tough love, sometimes it's really a big risk. Sometimes it's just a small thing and it's a small risk, but sometimes it's a bigger thing and it's a big risk when we lay down the boundary and say, this is not how I want to be living. And this is a very important distinction that he's making here between ultimatums and threats and a what so, where I'm imagining things are going to go if these behaviors don't stop, is that I am not going to be able to stay in this relationship. That's not a threat or an ultimatum. That's giving the other person the gift of knowing how close to the edge we may be that we're thinking of leaving the relationship, where they still have a chance to put some corrections in.
Yeah, very quickly, I just want to add an example. Actually, we have many examples of this where a couple will come in to see us, and one of them is pretty much out the door, and the other one is begging them to stay. And what they will tell us is one of them will say, I had no idea that, you were so unhappy. I just this is like, I feel like I was blindsided by a truck. And the other person will say, but I've been telling you for months, or in some cases years, that I'm unhappy. The problem is not that the person hasn't been expressing it, but they haven't been expressing it in a way that the person really got the message. Now, sometimes people do. They really do express it effectively, but for whatever reason, the other person is just totally closed. They're shut down. They don't hear it. But often, people are not committed to the communication. They're not committed to getting that message across in a way that the other person gets it. Mm-hmm. And when that's the case, they do feel like they've been blindsided. But it's because the communication hasn't been specific, strong, and clear enough for that message to get through. That is sometimes, not always, sometimes the case.
One thing that can really help if you're deliberating about whether you already practice tough love as part of your relationships with your people that are the closest to you, or whether you feel that you might want to move in that direction, to having a commitment to including tough love as part of your communication, is to really look at your values and see whether comfort and security is your highest value or whether honesty is your highest value. And don't trick yourself into thinking that if you go for the comfort and security model, that you're actually more comfortable and secure. That may be only on a temporary basis. Having the honest relationship is what I believe will take you the farthest in terms of having that rock solid bomb shelter of a relationship that can take difficulty and come through intact. I just want to mention that Valentine's Day is coming next week on Wednesday. And wouldn't it be wonderful if, I'm not saying don't buy the chocolates, don't get the beautiful card, get the chocolates, get the card, but how about some honest communication and a bit of tough love to enliven your relationship as part of the Valentine's gift? And you want to announce our topic for next week?
The topic for next week is that, yes, great relationships do require hard work. However, here's the caveat. It's not forever.
Hooray!
It's like a trajectory, and then after you go over that edge, over the hump, it's very different. So we just want to remind you that that's for next week. And also, for those of you who are on our mailing list, you're going to receive, if you haven't already received one, our February newsletter that just went out today. And in it, and oh, by the way, those of you who are not, go to our website. You can sign up for it, and you'll get a copy of this too. But in this newsletter, one of the things that we highlight is that we have a new book that just got published. And it will be available on Amazon in the beginning of April. And you can even get it before then if you want to order it from us, from Bloomwork. And we would love for you to check it out. On the newsletter we have an excerpt from the book that'll give you an example of the kind of writing that's in it. And it's very different from any of our other books. It's autobiographical in terms of covering a very specific time period in our life in which we had multiple serious challenges that we somehow were able to deal with, become successful in overcoming, but not without a lot of work. The book details the kind of work that it requires to deal with some of these mostly universal challenges. So check it out. I think you'll like it.
See you next week. Happy Valentine's season, and tell your friends.
Adios.